And for more on this General Assembly and the crisis in Venezuela, we are joined now by Eric Farnsworth. He's the Vice President of the Council of the Americas. More than 70 people dead after months of protests. The OAS, they meet. They can't reach a consensus. It looks a little like the UN with Syria. You know, you've got something exploding there, and they could have a decisive voice and say something. They don't. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Disappointment. Disappointment. I mean,
surprise and disappointment, or just disappointment?
Less surprise and more disappointment because of the nature of the Inter-American system, the nature of the OAS as an institution of member states. And many of the member states support Venezuela or receive economic assistance in the form of energy subsidies from Venezuela. And so to get over the 2/3 threshold to be able to do something meaningful, I think, was always going to be somewhat of a long shot. But nonetheless, based on the deterioration in Venezuela, the seriousness of the economic collapse, the seriousness of the security situation, the number of deaths that continue to mount, there don't seem to be a lot of peaceful paths forward from this point, particularly to the extent that the international community now is finding it so difficult to coalesce around a common path forward. So it's going to be increasingly complicated.
What does it say about the influence of the OAS? Or is there a larger statement here?
It's hard to say. The OAS has always been complicated. It is a political body. A lot depends on leadership in terms of the individual who happens to be the Secretary General. The current Secretary General, in my view, is a very strong, a very effective advocate for democracy, has taken a courageous view to try to move the ball forward in the context of Venezuela and other hemispheric democracy issues. But the Secretary General can only go so far without the support of the member states. And the member states fundamentally view these issues differently. Now, there have been some changes over the last several months and couple of years as elections have occurred in Latin America, have brought different governments to power who look at things differently in the context of Venezuela, and as the crisis in Venezuela has continued to deteriorate. So you get those two trends coming together, and you get the possibility of some action through the Organization of American States. The question I would have, and many people have, is this too little too late? I mean, how much time do we have before Venezuela really just does fundamentally collapse? And will there be enough time for the organization and the member states to coalesce around a certain path forward before that occurs in Venezuela?
Okay, so you took the question away from me. What is the answer?
Well, if I had it, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Caracas trying to improve people's lives. You know, the government has called a constituent assembly, which many people, in fact, a majority in Venezuela, reject. They're in the streets now. They've been in the streets for over 80 days. It's a really bad situation there. But the problem is the government has systematically closed off the avenues of peaceful protest and the avenues of peaceful change, whether it's through the electoral process, whether it's through the national legislature, which the government has cut off at its knees. So the paths forward have been constrained, leading toward either a full power grab by the government or perhaps some sort of violent confrontation.
There's this proposal of a group of countries mediating this crisis. Do you see that going anywhere?
Well,
and how might that work?
Well, it's a possible option. There have been similar exercises in previous years in Latin America to good effect, where you have interested countries come together to try to either help negotiate a peaceful solution forward or mostly, in the past anyway, to nudge governments forward so that they recognize that they need to make changes. This could work if you had countries who were independent, neutral, really were looking for a certain path forward. But the problem is this depends on whether the government itself is willing to change, is willing to make some changes, is willing to bring the opposition into more of a power-sharing type arrangement. In fact, they should be already, because the opposition controls the legislature, which the government has really tried to push aside and undercut. So the restoration of democratic institutions, I think, would be a really useful first step. And that could be something that a group of friends could push for. But you have to have the makeup of the group of friends, countries that really work well together. You have to have a common agenda, and you have to have a government that's willing to listen. And absent any of those particulars, the options for success are probably limited.
Yeah, when you look at that math, it doesn't look good, does it?
It's complicated.
Yeah. Eric Farnsworth, thanks so much.
Thank you.